Supreme Court of India will pronounce its verdict today, that is on 3rd of January, on a batch of petitions seeking examination of allegations of fraud made against Adani Group of companies in the Hindenburg research report. Now, the bench comprising Chief Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, Justices J.B. Pardiwala and Manoj Misra will deliver the judgment on as many as 4 petitions. The top court had reserved its judgment pertaining to the same case in November of 2023. Remember, the pleas claimed the allegations that Adani Group inflated share prices after report of short seller Hindenburg research. The share value of various group entities fell sharply. The ports to power conglomerate denied all allegations and also tried to rework its strategy for revival. The Adani Group, led by Gautam Adani, has dismissed all the allegations, labelled them as unresearched, malicious and mischievous. Despite this, the report prompted substantial decline in Adani Group stocks, resulting in about 140 billion worth eroded within days, compelling a cancellation of 20,000 crore share sale at the time. Adani, who was the world's second richest man at the start of the year, saw almost $60 billion of decline in personal wealth after the Hindenburg research report. All those allegations could be put to rest today or could be proven today, one way or the other. The verdict will be out very, very shortly. Sriram Subramaniam joining us on the show. Also with me is Karthik Malhotra. Before I go to Sriram, Karthik, it's a very crucial decision. It's a make or break for Adani.
Absolutely it is, Shweta. And I think the messaging was fairly clear even in the month of November last year when the Supreme Court had actually reserved its judgment. But it had said very clearly that there is no need for SEBI, the market regulator, to look at media reports as a gospel of truth. And I think the messaging has been fairly clear, and I think it is likely to be a favorable verdict for Adani Group. But until the verdict is out, I think one should not speculate. But you're
Absolutely.
right, it is an absolute make or break day, and today is the day that we've been waiting for, in fact, for many months now. Remember, it all started on the 24th of Jan 2023. We are on 3rd of Jan 2024. Almost a year since allegations of stock manipulation, flouting of MPC rules and gaining by way of short selling were levelled against Adani Group by Hindenburg research, and that sort of continued into another investigation by OCCRP, which built on what Hindenburg research had sort of come out with in its own research, followed by another scam that broke out, which was the coal overpricing invoicing. That, of course, is going to be outside of the verdict that the Supreme Court will pronounce today. But I think on this flouting of MPS rules and on stock manipulation, the various pleas filed in the Supreme Court for investigation into the matter is all up for its final conclusion one way or another today.
All right, Sriram Subramaniam. Sriram, would it be prudent to say, given how stocks are reacting at the moment, how markets are anticipating, the result could be favorable, also in line with, the commentary that came out of Supreme Court in the last session of the Supreme Court when the verdict was reserved? The commentary seemed favorable towards Adani.
Yes, I would think so. At least the markets are expecting favorable commentary. If anything, it may not be like overly sort of supportive of Adani, but at least dismissive of the allegations, I would think.
Okay. Dismissive of allegations, that is the expectation. But I want to take you back to 24th of January 2023, almost a year from now. Serious allegations were made. If we were to group these allegations into some of the major allegations, one was that of stock price manipulation, other was accounting fraud, and the third was, of course, that many of these entities have flouted shareholding norms, shareholding patterns. Those were the allegations. Over the course of last 1 year, we've seen Adani Group stocks taking a beating, personal wealth of Adani going down, Gautam Adani coming out for the first time in many years trying to clarify the air around these allegations. Since then, it's been a year, but seems like the saga has continued.
It's been a year. The saga has been continuing. Will the saga eventually end today is what I think we are waiting for, and we will know in a few minutes from now, Shweta. Yes, Adani Group stocks had taken a beating of about 150 billion dollars worth, yes. And a lot of that has actually been recovered as well. So there have been these nudges which have come. For example, I think the latest nudge that came in the recovery of Adani stocks was when it was seeking a loan from the US, the International Finance Corporation to develop a port in Sri Lanka. That is when we had seen some sort of, a major recovery in Adani
and a
stocks.
Commentary from
So
International
that pretty
Finance
much said,
Corporation.
and even the US, the department which was issuing this loan had said that the Hindenburg research report is inconsequential. It was inconsequential in the loan being given out because that loan is dependent on the corporate ratings that Adani Group has. So it had sort of, so that came as one straw of confidence in this overall saga, apart from many others which have come over time, including the expert committee appointed by the Supreme Court in the month of May, when it came out with its own interim sort of report on the investigation undertaken by SEBI. And this expert committee comprised no less than Justice A.M. Sapre. It comprised K.V. Kamath, Nandan Nilekani, O.P. Bhatt, etc. It was a six-member committee.
Some of the biggest industrialists, some of the biggest, most important names in corporate India.
So at that time, the narrative had actually shifted in the month of May to this expert committee giving a clean chit to Adani Group. But it was actually not a clean chit to Adani Group. It was more of a clean chit to SEBI, that there has been no regulatory failure on part of SEBI's own investigation, which it had undertaken into looking at Adani Group of companies in the year 2020.
Absolutely.
So it was more of a clean chit for SEBI than a clean chit for Adani. But today's verdict is actually going to hopefully come at some sort of a juncture where one may be able to more confidently say whether there was wrongdoing on part of Adani Group or not. Adani Group all this while has said that it has denied all wrongdoing. It has always said that this has been a calculated attack on India. So I think that narrative has been consistent for the last 1
Come
year.
to think of it, in the middle of the year, the narrative sort of shifted, Sriram. In the May, when expert committee, in a sense, said that we have concluded that we could not find anything wrong with how Adani Group of companies have operated, and shift the ball and the buck to SEBI. SEBI is to decide whether any norms, any markets norms were violated by Adani Group of companies or not. Now, since then, SEBI has come on record to state that we have concluded firmly investigation into 22 out of the 24 matters that we were investigating. What are we making of these investigations that have concluded? Is anything out in public domain for us to go through, for us to look at, to understand whether these 22 matters, or what are these 22 matters?
Yeah, I think the largest of these violations that SEBI would like to be investigating is the violation of the minimum public shareholding. That is, the minimum public shareholding should be 25%, and it is alleged that many of the shareholders are actually proxies of the promoters of Adani Group companies. So to that extent, these foreign entities, be it Mauritius, be it Cayman Islands, be it anywhere else, these entities are indirectly controlled by Adani promoters. That is the largest allegation. I think that would have taken SEBI a lot of time and effort to investigate. I'm not sure what the outcome of the SEBI findings are, because that is not in the public domain yet. None of the 24, I think, investigation matters are out in the public domain as of yet. Hopefully today, Supreme Court should table whatever SEBI's findings are.
Sriram, we are given to understand CJI has started reading out the verdict. Let me quickly read out what CJI is saying so far in the court. The Government of India and SEBI shall take into consideration the recommendations of the committee to strengthen the interest of Indian investors. That is the Chief Justice of India. He further says that the Government of India and SEBI will look into if there is any infraction of law by Hindenburg report on short selling, and if so, take action in accordance with the law. Essentially saying the recommendations that were made by expert committee will be taken into consideration. What were these recommendations, Sriram?
No, that's what I think. The Supreme Court is also just pushing the ball onto SEBI. I mean, SEBI as a regulatory framework, that is a framework which has to, I would say, investigate any violations of securities norms. And even the expert committee said the same thing. It effectively said that the current regulatory environment of SEBI is good enough. There is nothing to change. SEBI has to just do its job. I think Supreme Court will also do the same thing today. It will basically say, it won't explicitly give a clean sheet to Adani Group, but at the same time it will say that current regulatory, this one is fine, and SEBI should just continue with its investigation and not come out with its report or whatever.
So, Sriram, are we likely to see any sort of verdict on what the Hindenburg research had reported in the month of Jan, or is it going to be limited to the remit of SEBI? And what the flashes that we are seeing right now, which are coming in, suggesting that Supreme Court is going to park the ball again in the court of SEBI, saying that SEBI has to ensure that shareholders are protected going forward. It has to strengthen its own sort of framework to ensure that such cases do not happen. But in such cases, is this going to be some sort of a verdict on the Hindenburg research and the allegations it levelled against the Adani Group, or is it only going to be on what SEBI should do going forward?
No, I would think, because again, see, nobody can rely on a Hindenburg report. I mean, SEBI cannot rely on it, neither can Supreme Court rely on it. There is no ask by Hindenburg to investigate these matters directly to the regulator. They have just put out a report in the public domain. So to that extent, Supreme Court can only rule on the petitions. One. Two is Supreme Court will push the ball onto SEBI, saying that the current regulatory framework by SEBI is good enough. And so I would think the ball will again come back to SEBI. Supreme Court may dismiss all the petitions, saying that it is now the prevail or the territory of SEBI to going forward safeguard the interests of the shareholders of Adani. That is sort of leave it, I would say, in limbo. I mean, there wouldn't be conclusive yes, no, some grey areas will be there.
Okay, but there were certain pleas also in the Supreme Court, especially those which were filed by Prashant Kishore and Prashant Bhushan, I beg your pardon, as well as Vishal Tiwari, which were pleas where there was to be some investigation appointed by the Supreme Court in understanding these allegations by the Hindenburg research report and then by OCCRP. So, Supreme Court has thus far always said that these reports cannot influence the decision of SEBI. But does it really mean that there is going to be no independent investigation outside of SEBI when it comes to investigating this Hindenburg research?
You know, I think we do have an update on that. Okay. In fact, we are given to understand that Supreme Court has now said that there is no ground to transfer the investigation from SEBI to SIT, essentially limiting the investigation to SEBI itself, giving 3-month extension. Now, that is another significant update for our viewers at this point in time. SEBI says that it has completed its investigation in the 20 out of 22 matters.
That came out in November, in
yes,
fact.
And the CJI is saying that SEBI will be given additional 3 months to complete its investigation in the remaining 2 matters.
I hope we are not actually referring to what the Supreme Court said in the month of
November. These are the latest updates coming out from the court. CJI is reading the verdict. I'm reading from live law at the moment. And this is as I think dating back to about 5 minutes ago.
Right.
CJI continues to read out the verdict. He's also said that Supreme Court says that report of OCCRP cannot be taken into account to doubt the SEBI's investigation.
Which was again said in November. So
Absolutely.
I'm just wondering, is this a repetition of what the Supreme Court said in the month of November being read out again right now before the final verdict is given out, or is this part of the final verdict?
This is the part of the final verdict is what we're given to understand. CJI speaking on the final verdict. He is saying that the reliance on OCCRP report is rejected and reliance on third-party organization report without any verification cannot be relied on as a proof. So essentially, all those reports, all those allegations by OCCRP now stand to rest.
Okay. What do you make of it, Sriram? Is this pretty much saying that whatever has been published by independent research organizations or independent journalistic organizations like OCCRP, which are into investigative journalism, should have no bearing, no impact on how SEBI should go ahead and conclude its investigation now in this 3-month extension that has been offered?
Yeah, that's what I would think so. At the end of the day, no regulator can rely on a third-party research report, so to say. It can only sort of at least take into account the allegation, but it cannot rely entirely on it. It has to independently verify all the data points, and it has to, if anything, look at foreign jurisdictions to figure out who are the beneficial owners.
But does SEBI,
shares.
unlike the SIT or the Enforcement Directorate, does SEBI have the remit to really identify those opaque structures which reside outside of the shores of India? Can SEBI on its own undertake that investigation and come up with something conclusive, Sriram?
Yeah, that's where the challenge for SEBI is, because it may have to rely on certain other agencies like the Enforcement Directorate, etc., to actually query the foreign jurisdictions. So to that extent, SEBI may be constrained a bit uh, to investigate some of these matters, or may take a longer time to investigate. So at the end of the day, right now, I would think that all the petitions would be dismissed by Supreme Court. The ball will move to the SEBI. Basically, Supreme Court, the larger message is the regulator cannot rely on third-party reports. One, two is the regulator has to do their job, and the current regulatory framework or environment is good enough to investigate all these matters.
All right. In fact, court has also rejected the arguments of petitioners regarding conflict of interest on the part of members of the expert committee. That was another point
Which
of
again
contention.
had come out in the month of November,
Yeah,
where
but
the
there was
Supreme
no
Court had
outright
said
rejection.
there wasn't a verdict on that.
A
True.
verdict on that.
Yeah.
The verdict now is that allegations with respect to conflict of interest that were levelled by petitioners back in November have also now been rejected. Essentially, the expert committee report is what the Supreme Court is going by at the moment. They are also directing SEBI to protect the interest of investors and also be looking at implementing the report of the expert committee.
Okay, so let's just recap. What do we know so far from what is being said in the Supreme Court right now? We know for a fact that there is going to be no transfer of case outside of SEBI's remit.
So no SIT
no
probe?
SIT, no CBI, no Enforcement Directorate as of now, to our limited understanding right now, as the court is in its pronouncing of the verdict underway. So we know that there is going to be no transfer of the case outside of SEBI. We know for a fact that SEBI has now been given an extension of 3 months to conclude its investigation. Now, what we also knew in the month of November, and before that, even in the month of August, in fact, dating back to about 6 months ago, what we've known is that SEBI had concluded its investigation in 20 out of the 22 matters. The pending 2 matters, to our understanding, though nothing has been conclusively drawn on those 22 matters, was that SEBI has hit a wall when it came to opaque structures, which it was unable to penetrate. Those opaque structures were theoretically, so to speak, penetrated by OCCRP, where the final beneficiaries and their potential linkages to the Adani family had been drawn. But as of now, what we understand, Supreme Court is saying that the case will not be transferred outside of SEBI, and SEBI will get another 3 months to conclude its investigation in all 22 matters. Now, the question still that remains unanswered is, what if SEBI is unable to conclude its investigation on those 2 pending matters, even in the next 3 months? It has been dwelling over those pending matters for over 6 months now. If there was a headway, SEBI should have breached that wall and arrived at something conclusive. If it hasn't been able to do it in the last 6 months, or in the last 1 year, or since 2020 for that matter, will it be able to do it in the next 3 months? And if not, what happens after 3 months, Sriram?
I would think, yes, it's not an easy decision, I would think. SEBI by itself, I don't think has any control over how the foreign jurisdictions respond. So to that extent, even 3 months may not be sufficient enough for SEBI to conclusively arrive at any, I would say, bring all the 24 matters. Maybe SEBI will rule on the 22 matters and then leave 2 matters out for future date. We don't know that yet.
I think what's also important to understand is what are these 22 matters, and we know the 2 pending matters, and that is with respect to the foreign holding within the companies, the opaque structures as we call them. But what about these 22 matters? Is there a clean sheet to Adani in these 22 matters? Is that the understanding?
We don't know yet. I think that SEBI report in itself has not yet been released because it is pending on account of those 2 matters. So I don't think SEBI has yet publicly disclosed its findings on the remaining 20 matters as well. And that decision again is going to take the course of the law, and whatever SEBI has to deliver as part of its own report and its own leveling of action, penalties, etc., as the case may be, is going to completely be as per the law governing the regulator, which is SEBI. So as of now, I think another 3-month extension to SEBI to come up with some conclusion in its report, in its investigation, and add to that the fact that Supreme Court pretty much telling SEBI that do not rely on Hindenburg research, do not rely on OCCRP, do not rely on media reports. conduct your own investigation and basis your own objective investigation, follow the course of law and impose whatever is the due imposition on the matter.
And in fact, one of the most damning sentences that CGI has read so far, which I'd like to read it here for our viewers, is that before concluding, public interest jurisprudence was developed to provide access to ordinary citizens. Petitions which lack adequate research and rely on unsubstantiated reports cannot be accepted. Essentially wrapping up the petitioners as well, saying that the petitions were in fact not researched properly, they were on unsubstantiated reports. Further said that reliance on newspaper reports and third-party organizations to question the statutory regulator does not inspire confidence. They can be treated as inputs but not conclusive evidence to doubt SEBI probe. All in all, suggesting that SEBI will likely continue with the probe in the matter. In the 22 cases, the 2 remaining cases, of course 20 cases, it has concluded its investigation, but there is not going to be any transfer of power. Shriram, just to recap briefly what we are learning at the moment, statements, the judgment that is being read out by Chief Justice of India is that SEBI will likely continue with investigating the matter. SEBI has about 3 more months. That is what CGI has said at the moment. He has also, in a way, held the petitioners accountable for coming up or for bringing up these reports, the OCCRP report and the various other media reports which have leveled allegations on Adani Group, suggesting that these reports are not enough to go by and cannot ask SEBI or cannot ask transfer of ongoing investigation from SEBI to SIT on the basis of these reports.
Yeah, I would think SEBI itself is, empowered to investigate all the matters. So to that extent, transferring to SIT is of no consequence per se. If anything, SEBI has all the powers and should bring the investigation to some conclusive, point. So at the end of the day, Supreme Court is basically pushing the ball onto SEBI. Yeah.
Okay. Now going back to the original petitions, can we now say that the judgment has come favorably, Karthik, Shriram, in favor of Adani Group? Because the petitions asked for an SIT probe in the matter, that is not going to happen. Can we now conclude that the verdict is in favor of Adani Group?
Well, the verdict is definitely not against Adani Group, that is for sure. And the verdict is pretty much to do with SEBI and SEBI's investigation. The verdict does not yet have anything specifically for or against Gautam Adani. As I see it, Shweta, and the story is still developing, as I see it right now, is that there is going to be no reliance on Hindenburg Research, OCCRP, Financial Times, any public sort of reports which emerge in the media for SEBI to draw its own conclusions from, and it'll have to do its own investigation independently. That is number one. Number two, I believe the ball is squarely in the court of SEBI. Supreme Court is not going to intervene looking at the allegations of the Hindenburg Research or OCCRP into the matter, and is going to allow SEBI to follow its own course of investigation and come out with whatever necessary imposition and its own sort of, independent view on the matter and report that. And third, of course, is that more time given to SEBI to hopefully penetrate those opaque structures and draw some sort of a conclusion on the two pending matters. So the ball is squarely in the court of SEBI. Supreme Court is unlikely, in my understanding now, to intervene in this matter.
All right, Supreme Court unlikely to intervene, at least that's the reading of the judgment so far. Ashok Bagria joining us here in the studio. Ashok, what are we making of what CGI is saying at the moment? Couple of points that we've discussed. I don't think he has concluded reading out the final verdict, but what he's saying so far is no SIT probe, SEBI given 3 more months, the extension to conclude its investigation, and so far it doesn't look like anything is changed when it comes to Hindenburg Research allegations.
Well, actually, first things first, the judgment has been read out. What the Supreme Court has done is that it's put a quietus to this issue of Adani-Hindenburg issue. It is said that SEBI has already carried out investigation into 22 of the 24 cases. There are 2 cases which are pending in which SEBI has sought assistance from foreign authorities. The information to come from foreign authorities is taking time. So the Supreme Court is telling the central government and SEBI that expedite this process and complete the remaining investigations in 2 months' time. The second most important thing is that the Supreme Court has said a categorical no to transfer investigation from SEBI in the Adani-Hindenburg case to a special investigation team or the Central Bureau of Investigation.
Which was the ask of petitioners.
In fact, this was the only demand of the petitioners when they had come to the Supreme Court. There were 6 petitions which were filed in the Supreme Court, and they had come to the Supreme Court saying that, look, in the light of these revelations which have been made by the US short seller Hindenburg in its report, they have to be investigated by an independent agency. The Supreme Court, as a preliminary step in March 2023, had set up an expert committee headed by by a retired judge of the Supreme Court, Justice A.M. Sapre, and there were a few other members who were assisting him. And parallelly, what Supreme Court did was that, look, this is a complex subject which involves the markets. So what they did was they gave this task of carrying out investigations into the allegations to SEBI, and said SEBI will look into these complex matters. The expert committee will take a very broad view, give suggestions if there were any regulatory lacuna or regulatory failure on the part of SEBI. So the expert committee submitted its report. SEBI also submitted its report in November, where they gave a status report saying that 22 cases have been investigated, not a shred of evidence of wrongdoing or market manipulation by Adani.
Is that what they said in the report? Do we know that for sure?
No, we don't know that for sure, but the sum and substance of the report is that the SEBI has put its affidavit in a very shrouded language, and it's a very complex language they have put, but they have said that whatever we have been able to do was that so far no allegation has been substantiated as far as market manipulation is alleged. Now there are 2 remaining cases where SEBI has told Supreme Court that, look, we have sought information from foreign agencies because there are a lot of shell companies which are involved, and we have sought information from these authorities, and it will take time. The third most important thing is that the Supreme Court saying there was an application which was filed in the month of October-November, where there was an allegation of conflict of interest on part of at least 3 members who were a part of the expert committee. The Supreme Court has dismissed those allegations, saying that there is no conflict of interest. The fourth important thing that the court has said is that with respect to OCCRP report, where the OCCRP report said that SEBI had dragged its feet, and there was a lackadaisical attitude of SEBI in probing the investigations against Adani. So the Supreme Court has said that as far as these reports, OCCRP or newspaper reports are concerned, they are not conclusive evidence that some wrongdoing has happened. They can only be taken into account by the investigating agency, and it could be more or less like a corroborative evidence. So there is no conclusive proof of wrongdoing on the part of SEBI even in the OCCRP report. So they are saying that even this OCCRP report cannot be relied on.
Okay.
At the end of the day, the court has summed it up by saying that, look, this matter has to be given a quietus. Investigations have happened. 2 cases investigations are pending. SEBI will complete it in 2 months' time. The Government of India and SEBI should look into the expert committee's report if there are any suggestions as far as tightening the regulatory framework is concerned. That should be looked into, and also look into if there was an undue loss due to the stock market prices of Adani companies falling because of Hindenburg report, and undue loss to investors.
Okay.
That is what is the sum and substance of the judgment.
Ashok, is there any reason that the Chief Justice has given on not transferring the case outside of SEBI to independent agencies like CBI, SIT, or even the Enforcement Directorate?
Well, in fact, what the Chief Justice of India read out, or what probably could be the reasoning, we'll have to wait for the fine print. But from what we could gather when he was reading the judgment was the fact that, look, what we are dealing with, what the court was dealing with was a complex market matter, which is better investigated by the statutory regulator. Now, SEBI is a market regulator. It has been set up by an act of parliament, and you need to have faith in it. So SEBI has already carried out that investigations. You have to rely on it. There's no need. We believe that there is no need to set up an SIT or transfer it to a criminal investigating agency like CBI.
Okay, but will SEBI really have the teeth or the wherewithal to investigate the two pending matters which seem to be hitting a wall of opaque structures where SEBI is unable to penetrate and identify the final rightful beneficiaries of those opaque structures?
Because it hasn't so far.
Will SEBI have the jurisprudence outside of the shores of India? Because it hasn't yet been able to, in the last 1 year, definitely in the last 6 months since August, it hasn't been able to conclusively draw out the final beneficiaries of those two pending matters, which are the opaque structures. So, in the next 2 months or 3 months, will SEBI really be able to do anything it hasn't done thus far?
Well, so far, the thing is, the SEBI's stand in the Supreme Court has been that, look, we have been able to successfully carry out investigation into 22 cases. Now, these are 2 cases where we've run into some sort of a difficulty because information has to be gathered from foreign entities. Now, whether those foreign entities are going to cooperate with Indian investigating agencies is only time will say. Although the Solicitor General of India, Tushar Mehta, gave an assurance to the Supreme Court saying that we have some sort of a broad treaty arrangement with these countries, and under those arrangement that we expect that those countries and those foreign entities will be able to share information with us. So now that is an assurance, but it only time will tell whether there will be cooperation from these foreign entities as far as the wrongdoings, alleged wrongdoings of the Adani group of companies is concerned.
So, as far as the verdict delivered today is concerned, is the matter now completely out of Supreme Court? Are there going to be no more Supreme Court hearings on this? Has the matter from the Supreme Court's end legally come to an end?
Yeah. So, what this means, what this judgment means is that as far as Supreme Court's interference in this Adani-Hindenburg matter is concerned, it's a shut case. The court has said it's a closed chapter from our end. We did whatever we could have done. We ordered an investigation. We set up an expert committee and they have given their findings. Now it is time to implement those findings.
All right.
All right, so no regulatory failure on behalf of SEBI. There cannot be any reliance on unregulated substance or material, primarily referring to the OCCRP report, cannot be relied on. That is the verdict coming in from Supreme Court. I think it's fair to say at this moment that it's a shut case when it comes to the Supreme Court. Adani-Hindenburg case is no more in the legal corridors. It will now be solely SEBI's responsibility with the markets regulator to come out with its final report. 3 months extension has been given to SEBI. My colleague Suyash is joining us to discuss the stock impact. You know, just this morning, everybody was predicting a favorable result. This result is as favorable as it gets. Run us through how markets are reacting, especially Adani Group of stocks.
Definitely, Shweta, as you rightly pointed out, the market was preempting a favorable result for Adani Group of stocks, Adani Group of companies, and you know, they opened sharply higher with stocks rising as much as 17% in a day, you know, when the market overall was down about 0.5%. Now, Adani Energy Solutions was a top gainer in today's session. It was up about 17% or so at the day's high. But you know, since 10:30 a.m., once the judgment started coming out, they have paired some of those early morning gains. But all 10 stocks, Shweta, still are firmly in the green. Adani Enterprises, by the way, is up about 4% or so. And Adani Ports is also trading, you know, about 2% higher. Adani Energy Solutions, as I pointed out, was the top gainer in the stable of stocks. It was up about 12% or so. And, you know, if we look at the pre-Hindenburg levels, you know, about of the 10 listed entities, 4 are now in the green. If you could pull up those numbers, Adani Ports, now that has been the top gainer among you know, all the 10 listed entities. That is up about 100%, almost you know, 100% from the levels of January 24. Adani Ports has given returns of about 46.5% since January 24 when the damming report came out, and Ambuja has also turned a corner today, whereas ACC is almost flattish. It's down about 0.5%, and NDTV is up somewhere around 4.6%. Although, you know, a lot of other stocks such as your Total Gas, they have a fair way to go. Adani Total Gas is down somewhere around 72% from the pre-Hindenburg report levels, and Adani Energy Solutions, which by the way was the top gainer today, is down somewhere around 55-56%.
So, what does the Adani Enterprises still being down about 15% from pre-Hindenburg tell you, Suyash? Is it an understanding that while independent businesses can be trusted more by investors because they have certain projects in the pipeline, especially in the case of power and ports both, as well as green energy, which is also down incidentally. And enterprises at a group level, there is still some confidence, some assurance that investors are seeking.
Yes, I was talking to Mr. Mohit Gang of Moneyfront. He's of the opinion that they have cleaned up their balance sheets. Okay. And if you look at the past year, they have been able to raise money from marquee players such as your GQG, billions of dollars. And, they have restructured some of their debt, paid off some of their debt. So overall, the conglomerate on the whole is positioned well. And if you're talking about the stocks, it is still 15% down from the pre-Hindenburg level, but about 200% up from the 52-week low of 1017. So a big recovery we have seen in the group of stocks. And Adani Power, tremendous returns, almost a multi-bagger since January 24. So yeah, there is a lot of way to go, a lot of wiggle room for investors to still jump on the bandwagon. But as far as Adani group of stocks go, brilliant rally in the past 1 month. $46 billion of market capitalization has been added by the 10 listed entities.
Wow.
All right, and there's no reason to worry, at least as far as the legal hurdles are clear. They are cleared off the way, so Adani Group stocks will perhaps likely to show sharp recovery. They have been recovering since morning today. Suyash, thank you very much. We'll bring you back in to get updates on Adani Group stocks. But just to recap for our viewers, Karthik, what has happened so far and what do we know as far as law is concerned? We do know now that Supreme Court has delivered its final verdict on the matter. The Supreme Court is saying and suggesting that SEBI will continue investigating the matter. There is no outside probe in the matter, not going to be the case. Now, as far as all the other reports that we've discussed through the year, and we'll take our viewers through those reports as well, and what those reports suggest, because that is of consequence as well. The OCCRP report, the Financial Times report, all those reports cannot be relied on. But come to think of it, what did the OCCRP report actually tell you? It actually identified the beneficiaries of those opaque structures. The Financial Times reports further added on to an ongoing investigation into Adani Group of companies on coal price manipulation. So they were not very different from what Indian authorities are already investigating.
Let's the Financial Times report from this matter completely, because that was on a former DRI investigation which started a decade earlier. So if you were to look at the Hindenburg research report, which talked about stock manipulation and talked about flouting of minimum public shareholding, OCCRP in fact built further on that and was able to identify in its own understanding the rightful owners at the top of the food chain when it came to those opaque structures. Supreme Court in the month of November had very categorically suggested, if not stated, that these reports should not be taken as gospel of truth. Prior to that, what happened in the month of March was that the Supreme Court had appointed an expert committee. Who all comprised this expert committee? You of course had former Justice A.M. Sapre heading that expert committee. In addition to that, you also had luminaries like K.V. Kamath and Nandan Nilekani. And these are, and O.P. Bhatt, in fact former SBI chairman. So luminaries in the world of finance, luminaries in the world of technology, and heads of listed entities, all pretty much coming together conclusively saying that they have not found any regulatory failure on account of SEBI. Now, no regulatory failure on account of SEBI, but not technically a clean chit to Adani. Now, in November, the Supreme Court had again stated very clearly that these external reports should not be seen as gospel of truth. If anything, SEBI needs to further continue doing its own investigation independent of these reports. And today's verdict seems to be pretty much in line with the hints that the Supreme Court had given on the 24th of November. So again, stating very clearly that the ball is purely in the court of SEBI, giving SEBI another extension of about 2 months or 3 months, Ashok, I think 2 month extension. Okay. So another 2 month extension to SEBI to probe matters. Telling SEBI again, don't rely on OCCRP without naming OCCRP, don't rely on Hindenburg research without naming Hindenburg research, and saying that conduct your own investigation, an investigation that SEBI has been struggling to conclude ever since August at least, if not earlier.
All right, and before we get Sriram Subramanian, my colleague Shri Dharan also joining us here in the studio. Shri, is it now fair to say that Adani Group of companies has got something less to worry about at the end of this judgment, at least as far as legality is concerned, they are in the right?
It does look so, Shweta, because this is not a small, like a minor court which has, come up with this verdict. This is the Supreme Court of India. So I think the courts have looked at what is the credible evidence that is before them. And like Karthik mentioned, they are asking SEBI not to just go by any external report, whether it's OCCPR or a Hindenburg report or anyone else. So I think the court has very clearly put the onus on SEBI to look at and that's appropriate, I think, because SEBI is after all the market regulator. It's empowered to look into any kind of stock manipulation. And I think SEBI will obviously conclude its investigation and then come to a reasonable kind of a decision. Look, based on the evidence that's available. So I think what the court has done is the right thing.
Absolutely. And you know, what's also interesting to suggest, and I'm also, as we continue reading the verdict that it's coming out, Karthik, is that even SEBI for that matter, there is no wrongdoing on the part of SEBI. That is what CGI is also saying at the moment. No regulatory failure. So no wrongdoing.
That's what the committee had also said.
Committee had also said. So essentially, they are by the book, they are investigating, and we need to give them more time. I think we would like to end at that. That is what the CGI is saying.
My only sort of limitation in understanding this whole case right now, Shri, maybe you can help us and help our viewers understand, is that what is SEBI likely to do now in the next 2 months, which it hasn't been able to do in the last 6 months or the last 1 year or since 2020 for that matter, when it started its own independent investigation into the Adani group of companies. If it is hitting these opaque structures which are based outside the shores of India, and if it hasn't been able to penetrate those opaque structures for the last 4 years, almost now 3.5 years, what will it do in the next 2 months or 3 months? Does it have the teeth to go ahead and bite those opaque structures?
So, you know, Karthik, I think first of all, it's not unusual for large groups which are like on the rise to encounter such allegations and, you know, reports from, you know, others. Don't forget that even Reliance went through this phase early on in its, and the regulator at that time had to face similar challenges of having to probe something where they had limited information, where they're dealing with external agencies, sovereign agencies, which may not necessarily cooperate with you in terms of sharing information. So I think there's a very limited kind of ability which SEBI has to actually go behind the veil and look at what's really happening. And I think when they do that, they also have to see whether the corporate veil is as per law or not. I think that's probably what the real test of this whole thing would be. Whether is there any illegality in the structures. If there are certain structures which Adani has created, which is illegal from the word go, then certainly I think SEBI has a reason to look at it. But if on the whole the corporate structure is something which is commonly adopted by companies and it's you know, it's like kosher, there's no illegality in that, then I think SEBI will probably not want to pierce the veil to an extent where it's probably not, you know, it's empowered to, or where it's certainly going to hit a wall in terms of getting information or even cooperation from other sovereign agencies.
But in the month of November, Shri, SEBI had said that it does not seek any extension, it does not want any further time to complete its investigation. It is ready with those 20 out of 22 matters. Should SEBI not release at least its findings on the remaining 20 matters and not wait for this expiry of another 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, further extensions of timelines, and at least release what it knows for sure, rather than letting this case hang in speculation?
That's true. That's true. Because that's also not fair to the investors or not fair to Adani either.
I mean, what did we see today?
Yeah, because
we saw Adani
stocks, which is consistently hanging over
absolutely,
the group
and we are seeing investors also pretty much profit taking on a daily basis. Yes. You had Adani stocks before 10:30 a.m. this morning touching as high as 17%, 18%, and now there has been profit selling as the Supreme Court read out its verdict. So should SEBI not immediately at least release what it knows for sure?
I agree with you, Karthik, because SEBI, after all, is the custodian of the overall market functioning, right? It has to ensure that everyone in the market participant works with clear information, there is no uncertainty, and especially with its own investigation, I think SEBI should come out and say, okay, this is what our investigation was, and this is what we found, and this is the state of affairs as we know today. I think that's very, very important to settle the dust which is like around the Adani group.
Okay, taking a cue from what Karthik and you are suggesting is that somebody could decide to file an RTI. In fact, if SEBI decides not to release the report, because SEBI is covered under the RTI, and somebody is going to file an RTI and look into those investigation reports and say, look, this is what SEBI has actually found out in those 22 cases. Now, the most important things are these two cases. As it's already been pointed out that what SEBI is really looking at is extraterritorial jurisdiction. SEBI can control it's a market regulator, it can control the markets in India. It cannot force any foreign entity to share
Absolutely.
information
Yeah.
with respect to an Indian company. Now, what SEBI at the best it can do is to request the foreign entities, seek information and try to put the pieces of the puzzle together and come to some sort of a conclusion. And that is exactly what's going to happen in the rest of these two cases which are pending investigation.
And finally, also, what I want to add is that, despite the ongoing controversy, Shweta, Karthik, and, there are investors who come on board, put faith in Adani. We've had Rajiv Jain, GQG coming in, investing a lot of money, and he's made tons of money on that investment. And then you had even the US government's own fund, IDFC, investing $500 million in the Adani port. So at some level, I think we need to look at whether this has dragged on too much. And let's not forget that there has been a real damage to the Adani group. And was it just an innocent report from Hindenburg, or were there other forces at play? So we don't know.
Pretty much a black swan event for Adani Group, and it has seen the K-shaped recovery, so to speak.
Absolutely. So I think Mr. Gautam Adani is having the last laugh as his stocks recover and the stock market valuation goes back to what it was historically. So I think we'll have to wait and see if any new thing comes out of the reports that SEBI decides to release and how this whole saga ends. But I think right now, Mr. Adani has reason to smile today.
Absolutely. Shriram, a lot of organizations, media houses are going to run this as a clean chit to Adani, which was the case when expert committee also came out with its report. Shriram Subramanian, if you're still with us, sir, what would you call today's, how would you label rather today's SC ruling? Is it a clean chit to SEBI or is it a clean chit to Adani? And what are investors to look forward to when it comes to Adani group of companies as far as Hindenburg allegations are concerned?
No, basically the Supreme Court is saying let SEBI do its job. The petitions are dismissed. SEBI should not rely on these third-party reports. Let SEBI do its own investigations and come to conclusion. I would actually think 3 months down the line when SEBI will definitely come out with a report, impose some fine on some Adani group companies, and that may actually go to SAT. And so I would think that somewhere it is sort of you won the case, yet you sort of lost out. That's a type of thing. Definitely, this was not the remit of Supreme Court to investigate, and so that's where the ball is back to SEBI.
All right.
So it cannot be termed as a clean sheet, definitely, for Adani Group.
And what makes you say that there could be a fine on Adani group of companies? Because so far we don't know what those investigations have concluded, in what manner they have concluded, and what the final report is going to be all about.
Yeah, I agree completely. This is just speculative on my basis, saying that if SEBI finds something, at the end of the day, it will boil down to a fine or more disclosures by the Adani Group. SEBI may pull up Adani Group and fine it. And that's what has happened in the other cases that one of the speakers referred to also.
Okay.
So, Shweta, I'll be very surprised if there's any kind of, even minor kind of penalty, a rap on the knuckle put on Adani, because, we are talking about stock manipulation. And if you cannot selectively say, okay, we had only this much of a problem with Adani and they manipulated only this extent, or only these entities were involved. So either you give them a clean chit or you say that you find them guilty, right? So I don't think there
can't be a middle path.
There cannot be a middle path in this, because that's what you owe your investors, what you need to uphold for the sanctity of securities laws in this country. So I think either they get a clean chit, or SEBI has to come out and say, okay, we have found evidence and this is the penalty that the Adani, and it will not be a minor penalty in that case.
So now that we are looking at SEBI pretty much needing to strengthen its own sort of rules and its own mechanisms to ensure that no such, if you can call it such or not, no such alleged manipulations can happen in the future, what can and what should SEBI do? Is it important then for corporate India, listed companies, part of corporate India, to also disclose the final beneficiaries of any foreign investing they are receiving into their companies?
So disclosures absolutely have to be part of your corporate governance norms, Karthik, because you need to know who
should disclosures be limited to the country of funding, limited to the company registered in a particular country, or should it also be the promoters, directors and everybody who has anything to do with those investors?
Absolutely, it should go all the way back, because if you're a listed company in India where ordinary Indian investors are investing money in your company, then it's your duty to make the appropriate disclosures. And whether it is a step-down subsidiary, whether it's a holding company in a foreign country, you have to disclose who the beneficiaries are, who's the beneficial owner of these interests. So I think those are things which SEBI will now start looking at. And now don't forget there is enough technology which is now available, even in terms of your machine learning, artificial intelligence. There's a lot of data which SEBI can start crunching. And not just in terms of trading volume, but also publicly available data from other exchanges, which SEBI can start using. So it's a question of SEBI using this technology and the information available, and also tightening the norms to make sure that investors know enough about who the beneficial owners are. And if there are any entities which are trading in a particular stock, who these entities are and who are the beneficial owners eventually, especially where entities have limited float, because I think that's very important, because that's one way you can actually manipulate. If the float in the market is less, and let's say the promoters own significant part of the stock, then it becomes easier for them to do what the allegations typically tend to say about stock manipulation. So in those cases, I think SEBI needs to come up with stronger norms and say that this is the kind of disclosure you need to make in the interest of investors and the market at large.
All right, and final word perhaps, Karthik, on the people who've lost money post Hindenburg, the investors' wealth which was dramatically eroded, come to think of it, $150 to $160 billion worth of money eroded from market cap of Adani Group of companies. That money is not going to come back. So I think an investigation in that order is also necessitated at this point.
I think investors who are investing in any company, any stocks, know the inherent risks that come with investing. So is it fair to say that those investors have lost out because of some misgovernance, misdoing? Perhaps
allegations
not. So, these are all allegations at the end of the day. When you invest in a stock, there are risks associated with it. Even when you invest in mutual funds, which is a basket of stocks, there are risks associated.
Absolutely.
So, if you, and I think all market experts out there tell you, look at fundamentally good companies, stay invested for the long term.
Right.
If you bought Adani stock on the 23rd of Jan last year and sold it on the 25th, it was obviously bad investing. But if you did stay invested, you would have recovered a good portion of that already.
Absolutely. So just to add to that, Shweta, while equity market is known for its risk, you're supposed to invest with your eyes open. I think what as a regulator, SEBI should not condone is any kind of activity which is illegal, right? So, you have these companies which are like, stocks which are like pumped up and then dumped. So, pump and dump kind of stocks should not be allowed. Otherwise, equity is, the reward is proportionate to the risk you assume. So, I think that's something investors should understand before they come into the equity market. And like Karthik said, woe unto you if you sold the Adani stocks prematurely. You should have probably taken a cue from a man like Rajiv Jain and said, I'm looking at a multi-bag of stocks here. So I hope most of our investors who've been watching Newsline Live have stayed invested and kept faith in the Indian market, in the overall Indian market and the India story. So I think that's what Adani Group in some sense also represents, Shweta, to my mind.
But the Supreme Court is now suggesting that there should be a probe as far as loss of investors' wealth is concerned after Hindenburg. We don't know whether there's going to be a proper investigation into the matter, but the legal matter now stands closed. The Supreme Court says SEBI has been given 3 more months to carry out its investigation in the remaining existing matters, but SEBI will continue investigating Adani Group of companies. As far as outside investigation is concerned, that is not going to happen anytime soon. Gentlemen, thank you very much, all of you. Sriram Subramaniam, to you too, sir. Thank you very much for taking time out for joining us here on Newsline. But with that, it's a wrap. Thank you for watching.